Welcome back to Italian Innovators. This is Luca Cottini, Associate Professor of Italian Studies at Villanova University. There is a very common myth that Italians have often adopted at various points to give some sort of coherent self-narration to their intricate web of cultures, civilizations, languages, traditions, and landscapes. It goes like this. Italiani, popolo di santi, poeti, e navigatori, which means Italians, a people of saints, poets, and sailors. You may call it simplistic, ideological, outmoded, but as a matter of fact, it actually still works, even though we should probably add of innovators too. Of course, we all know the story of the Genoese sailor Christopher Columbus, even though he never actually worked for any Italian court, or of the Florentine navigator Amerigo Vespucci, who first understood that a new world had been uncovered. The German cartographer Walse Müller recognized him by naming the new land America in his honor on a map of 1507. Maybe in some history class, you've also learned about two other Italian sailors, the Neapolitan Giovanni Caboto, John Cabot, who first charted the coasts of North America in 1497 under the sponsorship of King Henry VII of England, and the Tuscan Giovanni da Verrazzano, who first explored the New York Bay in service of King Francis I of France. Every time I drive through the Verrazzano Bridge in New York City, I always think of his first wonder at the sight of the Upper Bay after a long journey through the ocean. This would be the first sight of America also for many emigrants centuries later, right before the vision of the Statue of Liberty. Now the poets. Well, Italy is very well equipped here. Italian poets had been models in European literature for centuries. Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio during the Middle Ages, Tasso or Ariosto during the Renaissance, and Marino during the 17th century. Even more recent poets are among the most renowned in the Western canon, so people like Leopardi, Pascoli, or D'Annunzio in the 19th century, or Montale, Ungaretti, Luzzi in the 20th. Lastly, saints. Well, also in this category, Italy has plenty to offer. Apart from its two patron saints, St. Francis of Assisi and St. Catherine of Siena, who are two of the most beloved saints worldwide, other Italian saints are also St. Charles Borromeo, Aloysius Gonzaga, yes, Gonzaga University is dedicated after him, John Bosco, and up to the present, Angelo Roncalli, Pope John XXIII, Giovanni Battista Montini, Paul VI, or Gianna Beretta Molla. We might also want to add, even if they are not technically Italians, some of the major saints of Christianity who have their tombs in Italy. So St. Peter and Paul in Rome, the evangelist St. Mark in Venice, St. Luke in Padua, St. Ambrose in Milan, St. Augustine in Pavia, St. Nicholas in Bari, yes, he is Santa, and St. Benedict in Monte Cassino. You might have heard this last name at some point in history class because the Allies mistakenly bombed his early medieval monastery in 1944. Okay, the list of past sailors, poets, and saints seem to confirm our initial myth, right? Now, let's see if and how it still fares in the present, especially in American culture. Well, Italians are still at the top of the nautical industry, as they produce roughly 40% of the world's yachts. Surely a legacy of the skills and craft of navigating that was handed over from generation to generation. With regard to poets, Dante remains an evergreen in American culture. You can find him in books. In Dan Brown's novel Inferno, and here is my alternative suggestion, in the thriller The Dante Club by Matthew Pearl. He can also be found in video games. Check out Dante's Inferno if you love Xbox or the PlayStation, and all over popular culture. I recommend visiting the website Dante Today, which tracks sightings and sightings of Dante's works in contemporary culture. So just yesterday I saw one bottle of red wine with the label Inferno. As for the saints, Italy actually gave America a very beloved saint, Mother Frances Cabrini, who was not only the first American citizen canonized by the Catholic Church, but also a very remarkable woman whose impact is still immensely tangible in both Italian and American culture. Today, I want to talk to you about her extraordinary life. Now, before I even start, you might ask me right away, and fairly so, why is a saint an innovator? We generally have an idea of saints as people that are somewhat stuck in prayer cards or are somewhat separated from our daily life, isn't it? So, what does innovation have to do with sainthood? Well, if it's true that there can be no innovation without a clear sense of purpose or intentionality, well, sanctity is all about recognizing and embracing and pursuing that meaning. In observing Mother Cabrini's life, then, what is striking is exactly this, that there is nothing extraordinary or visionary or separate in her. She did not live in a parallel reality. What is extraordinary instead is her capacity to live ordinary things intensely, to see them more deeply, to engage them meaningfully as terminals of a love relationship. Literally, like when you fall in love. Because of the beloved, all things, even the smallest details, suddenly become relevant and worth our attention. Well, Cabrini's attentive vision, endless creativity, and inexhaustible thirst for good came in the same way as an expression of a deep love, in her case with the person of Christ. You may believe it or not, it's not the point here, but when the Catholic Church proclaims someone a saint, it literally ratifies this love, as in the Latin etymology of saint from the verb sancire. It recognizes indeed that a loving union is not only fully accomplished, but also fruit-bearing. Here is where the innovation comes. By being one with her beloved, Cabrini indeed not only found the strength to venture into uncharted territories, but also the drive to generate endless fruits all over the world, like hospitals, schools, and even a university. From a secular perspective, a good comparison to understand this dynamic is actually dance. In dancing, and I confess I'm not a great dancer myself, but my wife is, you need to have two abilities. One, to keep your eyes fixed on your partner, and second, to endlessly change plans or directions to follow his or her lead. In the dance of her life, Cabrini maintained both an unconditional dedication to her demanding lover and an endless creativity in following him. This is what a great dancer would do. To give you a comparison, here is how Alexander Bland described the commitment to dance as an ideal of the greatest dancer of our age, Rudolf Nureyev, in the book The Nureyev Image, and I quote, "For its sake he fought and sweated, suffered, quarreled, insulted and bore insults, schemed, dreamed, and made bitter sacrifices. Dance took priority in his life over everything and everyone else. His loyalty to it was unquestioning. It was both the means of his living and its end." End quote. For the sake of her mission, Cabrini equally worked and found creative solutions all her life, always finding the motivation to turn old into new, problems into opportunities, practical realities into spiritual ones. This is the heart of a true innovator. Now, Francesca was born in a small town in Lombardy, Sant'Angelo Lodigiano, in 1850. And after becoming a nun, she just danced with her partner wherever he took her, from Codogno, where she ran an orphanage and took her religious vows, to New York City, and then from there to New Orleans, Chicago, Seattle, and Radnor too, right around the corner from Villanova, where Cabrini College is now located. As a young nun, in the religious congregation of the Daughters of the Sacred Heart, she was filled with a missionary desire. In search for ways to give form to her love for Christ, she found a model in a Jesuit saint of the 16th century, Francis Xavier, one of the closest friends of Ignatius, the founder of the Society of Jesus, so the Jesuits. Francis Xavier had sailed for East Asia along the commercial routes opened by the Portuguese to evangelize India, Japan, and China. Although he never saw again his friend Ignatius, he remained in touch with him through letters. At his death, a little container was found around his neck, which included a relic, his vows, and the collected signatures of his friends that he cut off from their letters. They were not fire. They were right in his heart the whole time. This detail really prefigures the experience of Mother Cabrini and of many other immigrants, living for the unknown with few dear objects and carrying on their faces or in their pockets the faces or the written traces of all who generated them. Mother Frances Cabrini was so much fascinated by Francis Xavier that she added Saverio to her own name and asked the Pope, Leo XIII, to be sent as missionary to China in his imitation. She actually met the Pope in 1887 to make this an official request. He listened to her, but at the time when Italian immigration was taking massive proportions, he completely changed the game by simply answering, and I quote, "La vostra Cina saranno gli Stati Uniti. Your China will be the United States." Okay, now imagine her reaction and think how much guts or humility or availability or craziness or whatever you want to call it, it takes a 37-year-old girl to radically change plans, like from east to west, and embrace a much different journey. She simply accepted the task that was assigned to her to take care of the material and spiritual well-being of Italians migrating to the United States. And in March of 1889, like any other migrant, she left on a boat for New York City in the company of 7 other nuns of her order, the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. She just followed the lead of her spouse, calling her beyond her mental horizon, without anything, yet full of everything. As she landed in New York City, she faced all sorts of difficulties and worked tirelessly to learn English as a way to provide useful service to Italian migrants. With the help of her sisters, but also of laborers and benefactors, she managed to establish an orphanage in Upper Manhattan and gather resources to found the Columbus Hospital in New York in 1892. Now stop a second. She found a hospital for the Italian community only 3 years after her emigration. And a few years later, she would even open its extension in the Italian neighborhood of Chicago. Over the course of almost 3 decades, she then traveled all over the country, creating schools and religious houses in Chicago, Seattle, New Orleans, Denver, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. While serving the poor, the sick, and the illiterate, she never forgot her primary focus on the care and integration of Italian migrants, allowing them to exist and become protagonists in American society. The impact of her work was so profound and enduring that some even dare to say that while Christopher Columbus discovered America, while Mother Cabrini discovered Italians. She would never go to China as she desired, even though her missionary sisters went for her after her death in 1917. But her fame grew worldwide and was so widespread that even after her beatification in 1938 and canonization in 1946, people continue to call her just Mother Cabrini. A similar example in our world would be Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Even the secular world recognized her contribution or the fruits of her work, as Francesca Cabrini was inducted in the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1996. Now, I want to stress 2 significant elements of her spiritual legacy and social contribution. First, against the backdrop of the existing model of the enclave, gathering immigrants of different groups in isolated networks of reciprocal aid, Cabrini embodied a different model of immigration, simultaneously focused on the need to preserve traditions and the necessity to integrate into American culture. Unlike other religious institutions, Cabrini made it a point indeed that immigrants should learn English, yet insisted that they also should retain Italian. In her story as an Italian nun, naturalized as an American citizen, she witnessed the feasibility of a bicultural and bilingual model, grounding the adventure in a new land in a solid spiritual and cultural tradition, yet also transporting past heritage onto a new cultural horizon. In order to do this, Mother Cabrini had to constantly reinvent her Italian and Catholic identity in new forms, without entrenching herself in an island, but rather using translation as a way to mediate two worlds, and tradition as a strong foothold for judging the present and envisioning the future. As a true visionary, able to both see the past without betraying or casing it, and translate it into new forms. Secondly, in providing services to immigrants and supporting their spiritual life, Mother Cabrini was immensely creative in pursuing new ways to improve life for the community. Her boldness with donors and entrepreneurs was truly remarkable, both in her capacity to challenge their generosity. She once asked a New York philanthropist to actually adopt not one or two, but all her orphans, and in the living provocation of her poverty, making her truly disinterested and free. Pay attention. Poverty is not the rejection or lack of resources here, but rather the awareness that everything belongs to someone else. So, for someone with a great entrepreneurial drive like Mother Cabrini, not owning anything means to constantly ask what resources are for, to whom they belong. That's quite a challenge, huh? So not money for the sake of money or work for the sake of work, but money or work for the pursuit of a meaning or a greater good. As a homework for today, I invite you to visit Cabrini College in Radnor, PA, or the shrine where Mother Cabrini is buried in Washington Heights in New York City, as a way to encounter the charism that generated all her works through the nuns of the order which still exist. Also, to see the ongoing impact of her work still nowadays, search online for all the institutions that she found around the world. As we discussed, all of this came from a clear purpose, and here it is in her own words. It's quite remarkable to see the similarities with Nurayev's approach to dance. The key of her mission was then, in Italian, lavorare, sudare, faticare per Dio, per la sua gloria, per farlo conoscere e amare. To work, to sweat, to toil for God, for His glory, to make Him known and loved. For this she danced. For this she sailed west. For this she took care of Italians and became the patron saint of emigrants. And yes, for this, for the fruits she bore, she is also a great innovator. Arrivederci e alla prossima.